Hi, welcome to National Arts. I'm Mike Baker. We're here in Shepherdstown, the oldest town in the state of West Virginia and home to the Contemporary American Theater Festival. Each summer, the festival produces 6 new plays and rotating repertory. Playgoers call it the ultimate theater experience. On this program, we'll bear history to some major events: the rise of the Third Reich, the civil rights struggle, and the dawn of the nuclear age. In 1937, after performing a sold-out concert in Princeton, New Jersey, internationally renowned singer Marian Anderson was refused a room at the whites-only Nassau Inn. With nowhere to go, Albert Einstein invited her to stay at his home, thus beginning a lifelong friendship between the two icons. Deborah Bavort's play, My Lord, What a Night, not only examines early racism in America, but the rise of anti-Semitism and the inception of the first nuclear bomb. The role of Albert Einstein in My Lord, What a Night is played by esteemed Agnes of God playwright John Leonard Pielmeyer. Angela Wildfire plays Marian Anderson. Lizanne Mitchell portrays Mary Church Terrell, and Larry Paulson plays Abraham Flexner.
Such as?
Harmonizing.
Harmonizing?
Yeah.
With what?
American society. That's what I do.
You mean assimilate and conform?
No, I mean work quietly behind the scenes. I have made my way among the Christians by not drawing a lot of attention to myself. It's the key to my success, and it's the key to Miss Anderson's as well. Am I correct, Miss Anderson?
I have made it my mission to leave behind a favorable impression, to make it easier for those who follow.
Exactly.
It is a Jewish weakness to always try to keep the Gentiles in good humor.
Anti-Semitism is increasing.
John, congratulations on an amazing portrayal of one of the most iconic men in all of history, Albert Einstein. What a delight. That must have been not only eye-opening, but terribly rewarding.
Well, it's a lot of fun to play this part. And I'm not a mimic, so I have no ability or intention to try to portray the real Albert Einstein on stage. My goal is simply to give life to Deborah Bavort's Albert Einstein and to find the Einstein in me. That's all I can do, and bring that out.
Isn't that
if it works,
fascinating?
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There is an order in the universe, isn't there, according to Einstein? But really, humankind really complicates it a lot, doesn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, he would say that one of his famous sayings is that God doesn't play dice with the universe. But then I have to ask, and he may have asked this, does God play dice with humankind?
Yes, exactly.
How much of it is up to us and how much of it is up to God, to Einstein's God, and then whatever.
This play deals with very serious subjects, but we must not lose sight of the fact that it's also
funny.
very humorous.
It's a very funny
Very
play.
funny.
And I'm lucky because I got most of the funny lines.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of throwaway lines for sure.
Yeah.
But you know one thing about Einstein, the way you play him, he takes what he does seriously, but he doesn't take himself too seriously. And man, that is one of the greatest things about life.
Not at all. He was so humble. There was a genuine humility, certainly in my perception of him. In fact, I heard a story the other day from someone who was a student of his. I had tea with him, and at the end of the tea, the student's professor said to Einstein, would you give the student some advice about moving forward in life as a scientist? What would you say to him as one of the great scientists of all time? What kind of advice would you give? And Einstein kind of shrugged and said, who am I to say?
I love that.
It was sort of so
self-effacing
and humble. And that's generally who he was.
And very affable.
Yeah. Yes.
Very friendly, very loving, very non-biased, very open-minded. I guess because he had such a macrocosmic view of the universe that he knew that things like racism and things like anti-Semitism just had no place.
I mean, he was deeply passionate about that. And of course, what's interesting is that he was not himself an observant Jew, but he would always acknowledge his Jewishness and he talks about at one point in the play about embracing the moment when he embraced his connection to the Jewish people, which happened in his early 20s.
Yeah. You have a great line in the play about listening and being creative.
Yeah, I love that line.
Yeah, explain that for us.
He's talking about Mozart, and he says, you know, I discovered the secret to Mozart's genius. He didn't write his music. He didn't compose his music. He plucked it from the universe. And he says, it's true. He says all great composers, they don't create, they listen, and then they write down what they hear. And then he says, and the great scientists do that also. And I believe personally that that's true of all great artists, that it's all about getting in touch with the universe inside you and allowing yourself to be open to what that is saying.
And that all comes from imagination, which he was
Totally.
so key in his life.
Oh yeah, he was an incredibly imaginative man, and that's, as a child, he didn't speak for many, many years, and the servant, his family servant, called him the dumb one. They thought he was stupid, and he was just waiting to speak, but he talked about how that developed his pictorial mind, that he would see things outside of words, and that's what really helped tremendously to make him the great scientist that he was.
And you had this other wonderful line about there are two things that are infinite, the universe and man's stupidity.
Yes, right. He's talking about alcohol. He was not a drinker, and he said he always believed that alcohol was a recipe for stupidity, and he says, and we're stupid enough.
Do you think that his perspective on the Judeo-Christian principles made him more open-minded when it came to things like race?
I don't know what made him open-minded along those lines. I certainly think that some of that, a great deal of that, was affected by how he was treated as a Jew, even in pre-Hitler Germany. And then when Hitler came into power, that was it. He was out of there, and came to the United States in 1933, the very year that Hitler became chancellor. And but I'm sure that his feelings about that and his genuine love of humans, I think, had a lot to do with his feelings about racism. And he was tremendously anti-authoritarian. As it was almost a handicap to him as a young man in terms of getting a job. He would just defy authority, and I think his strong feelings about racism, particularly, say, in America, were influenced tremendously by his defiance of authority. He just hated what parts of the American people and the government stood for. Things that we now accept as completely, unbelievably wrong.
I know.
But at that time were accepted, sadly, as a way of life.
Yeah.
I hope you won't be too severe with me. Everyone must from time to time make a sacrifice on the altar of stupidity. I did so thoroughly tonight. I got carried away. I apologize.
Thank you.
Please, don't leave.
I'd much prefer to stay here than the colored YMCA.
Oh, you'll stay?
Yes, I'll stay.
Oh. With fame, I become more and more stupid.
No.
Right, Flexner?
Well, I won't disagree with you on that.
You can leave now, Flexner. You don't have to worry. I won't be doing a press conference tonight.
What struck you most when you were doing all your research about Marian Anderson? What stuck out the most, do you think?
What I loved most when I thought about it was the intersection of music and math and science, and how people connect, and what, you know, you would think, oh, an artist connects to an artist, but really passionate people connect to other passionate people. And that's what I found to be their intersection, was the passion and the love for what they did that created an understanding and an intersection there that I think is important as we're moving through the world to find out what we have that does connect us. And so I thought that was really a big foundation for the friendship and the story that we were telling. And that kind of set the stage for everything. How do I find the intersections and why this friendship was able to sustain itself?
Music is a universal language. It might be the only one.
Isn't it?
It might be the only one.
It's a beautiful thing, and every night I am more in touch with the concept. You know, she says a line that music will lead us, you know, to a new future, and you say, it can, because through music, as she was this music artist, she had fans of all colors and races, and you know, it becomes this universal language, and that was the intersection with them as well too. His love for music, which was a surprise to her. You know, you've read about Albert Einstein, and you're thinking science and math, and then you get to his home and you find out he loves the same music that you love. We both love Schubert.
And you both love Swiss chocolate.
And we both love Swiss chocolate.
I think one of the challenges for you as an actress, not just having to portray her in terms of her vocal ability, but really being the reluctant saint initially, and then becoming a civil rights activist. There's an interesting transition in that play, isn't there?
Her journey, you know, to start at a place. Well, what I had to make peace with for myself was, this is not 2019. This was 1937, and how much was at stake? You know, even when I call her a reluctant revolutionary, there was so much at stake. There was so much to lose, and there were so many people who had invested in her journey. So, you know, you're carrying a whole community. You're carrying the hopes of everyone with you. So, I think, you know, on one hand it's reluctance, but on the other hand, it is just a deep love for this opportunity she's been given in 1937 to use her voice and tour the world.
As we watch the play, the reticence she has early on about becoming involved in these various activities, is it because she felt that it would somehow distract from her vocal ability or her study or her concerts? Was she really concentrating initially on the voice and what that might do?
Music was everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always wonder if the audience gets that, but when that phone call comes early in Act 1, she's on the phone with that manager who's telling her, if you talk to the press, it's over. Everything you've worked for, we're not going to be able to book you. We're going to remove you from the concert circuit. There was a lot at stake beside just, I don't want to speak up. You know, everything that I've worked for up to this moment. And in 1937, she still was growing too. It wasn't, oh, I'm at the height of my fame. There was still so much more to do. And then you have this moment that says, well, do I risk everything and go out here and speak on this? Or do I look at the bigger picture and keep going and remain this, this model of hope for what we can become? So I think there was just an interesting method, her methods for civil rights, and the way that she wanted to approach it was just through music and being an example. It just wasn't as fiery as some of her counterparts.
Yeah, I just can't even imagine how difficult it must be to get up every day and look at the day in its uncharted territory.
Yes.
And not know which way to head, and not know how to interact, and not know how to react.
Absolutely.
That is, I mean, she was one amazing human being.
You just had to be, she and so many others, you know, that were paving a way at that time. You know, you just get dropped into the way this story goes, you just get dropped into a situation. I should just be able to go to a hotel after this great concert and relax. But instead, I have started a whole firestorm. And I think that is what the play shows, that she's just been dropped into this place, and each moment she's figuring out what's the proper thing to say, what's the emotion that I can show you, and what am I trying to hide. You know, there's so many things, because one wrong move and everything's at stake, move to move and moment to moment. So
that particular difficulty at the Nassau Inn was key in meeting Einstein. And it led to the relationship and the overnight stay and what blossomed from there. So in some fashion, evil sort of manifested itself in a number of positives.
But isn't that life? That's what
I
life does
suppose.
for us, right? We end up in places and we don't know how it's going to bless us or teach us in that moment. And then when you look back at the bigger picture, you say, oh, that's why that had to happen. And without that, besides just their friendship, but look, the whole Lincoln Memorial concert, you know, just who knows what the evolution was that got her to that final place of.
Yeah, the Constitution Hall slight was pretty dramatic, and then getting Eleanor Roosevelt involved,
Right.
and her setting up the concert at the Lincoln Memorial. For Marion, for race relations in this country, for the whole movement, that was a memory no one should forget.
Agreed. And you know, there was someone that came to the show, and I think she said she was a kid and her parent took her.
Wow.
You know, and we're celebrating the 80th year, so we are moving into a generation of people who aren't aware, and it is easy to forget when you're not there. I just never thought in a lifetime that I would get to push her story forward and push her her ideology forward. This moment when I break the fourth wall at the end of the play, the director, Ed, was very clear. He said, break the wall and you look and you connect with everybody out there, as many people as you can, and you look them in the eye and you say those words so that they feel it. And it gave me such a purpose in doing this that's beyond fame or any of that thing. It's like, how do I connect and how do I affect the people when they leave this
Don't you
space?
think that Marion, when she got her first break, may have cried too?
Oh, yeah.
And for things for which I am not well suited.
Are you going to speak to him, Professor Einstein?
No, I'm not.
Then I guess I will. You may not want to hear what I have to say, but I can't let that stop me from saying it. My power of endurance has always been my greatest asset.
You know, such a formative force in how we carry ourselves today, you know, not only as African Americans, but as women. You know, she set a high, high standard and a selfless standard. I mean, she wasn't looking for credit for anything that she did. She was looking for a resolution to a problem and was so innovative and persistent in having that come about.
Yeah, she reads people well, doesn't she? Because in the play, she has a profound effect on Marian Anderson and eventually gets her to head in another direction.
I think that having dealt with so many different people through the course of her life, because she's 76 at this point, you know, of the play, she understands that in order to really communicate with someone on a heart-to-heart level, that you have to understand what words will make a difference to that person. You know, what tone will make a difference to that person. And I've kind of changed in this play a little bit too, you know, because like if you come in with that rebel rousing, you know, I'm going to change you, no matter how right that might be, people establish a deaf ear to that, you know, automatically. So you have to really, really merge yourself as much as you can with the other person you're talking to.
Yeah, almost definitely. What was the biggest challenge, do you think, in playing her? Was it trying to somehow exemplify all that subtext that was so rich in terms of her life? Was it the fact that she had to transform even within the play, ameliorate a little bit. What was the biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge for me, having come out of the civil rights movement, and the majority, a lot of it started in my hometown in Greensboro, North Carolina. And this is when civil rights, particularly demonstrations to end segregation, was very big, and also concurrently was the Vietnam War. So the whole of a town was involved politically, and in a very loud kind of way. And when I say loud, I mean, for the first time, this voice is being voiced, you know, and so you feel very invigorated because this is the first time you've been about to be heard. And so to pull that back into the 30s, when people had a whole different sense of decorum and how you present yourself, and even the words, I mean, we use very few words now compared to what was going on in the 30s, you know. So adjusting how I say what I say to the time period, I think was the biggest challenge.
You cannot keep in the public eye like this.
This is America. I'm free to say and do as I please.
It's not that simple. You need to keep your views to yourself.
But if I did that, I wouldn't be Albert Einstein.
Well, if you don't do it, you won't be Albert Einstein for much longer.
Now you bring all these forces together in the, it's actually totally accurate, the fact that you bring all these scientists and great minds together in this sort of cauldron of ingenious creativity, and you're responsible for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was approached in the late 20s by the representatives of the Bamberger family, who owned a large department store, and they had sold the store just weeks before the crash happened, and they were sitting on a lot of money, and they really wanted to do something important, and they wanted to found a medical school. But in talking to Flexner, he convinced them to put their money into the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton. So it really was his brainchild. And by this time, he was a past master at raising and distributing money.
Boy,
For the
that's
Rockefellers, he had raised $600 million and distributed it to medical schools that were willing to adopt the kind of reforms that he had promoted in his report 1910.
The relationship he has with Einstein is so rewarding and so entertaining. It's interesting. He seems to read you better than you read him. And yet, in the end, you have the last word.
Well, I think so. It's a little hard to tell with Flexner what he notices, what he thinks inside his own head, and what he's willing to let out, and what he says in order to get the response that he needs from a person in the moment. I think he's certainly a good judge of Einstein's volatility.
Yes.
Now, maybe not quite as good a judge of his motivations.
Yeah, I mean, Einstein in the play has a very capricious nature.
Yes.
Yeah, he's affable, but at the same time, he doesn't fly off the handle, but he launches forth without thinking.
Well, Flexner certainly thinks he's reckless.
Yes.
And capable of causing some damage that he doesn't anticipate.
Yeah. Well, scientists in this little enclave that your characters created, both in the play and in real life, they wouldn't have an understanding of the outside forces because he apparently shielded them from that.
Well, it was the point of the Institute, was so that they could be free to think, explore, and develop their ideas without those kinds of pressures.
James McNeill Whistler sort of defined what art is, and it sort of in a way applies to Einstein and his argument that he's giving you, and that is what determines art, what determines creativity is not the time spent. It's not the productivity, it's the reputation. And Einstein plays on that.
Yes. Well, I think he expresses to Marian Anderson his feelings of inadequacy, and he feels that he's beginning to fail as a scientist, which happens to lots of mathematicians. Actually, it's famous. The field is famous for early achievement. But he's got a worldwide reputation, and he says to me in the play, he's determined to use his fame to do some good in the world.
You can leave now, Saxon. You don't have to worry. I won't be doing a press conference tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on National Arts. I hope you enjoyed meeting director Ed Herendeen and the cast of the much lauded My Lord, What a Night. Until next time, remember, art was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it.